on the metaverse since, of course, Zuckerberg's announcements back in October. And myself and a bunch of people who I know and respect in the industry are not quite as bullish on the metaverse. And so a little bit of a discussion arose, and the bulk of the sentiment is, what the hell is the metaverse anyway, and why do I care? And in that is a whole bunch of questions like, is it really the $1 trillion opportunity that Forbes says, or is it a dystopia that, like Wired says? I tend to lean more on the Wired point of view. And of course, people in marketing and advertising, et cetera, tend to lean on the Forbes $1 trillion opportunity point of view. And I rather expect that the reality is somewhere in the middle. So just to really have the conversation and answer those questions, I agreed to have this webinar. I should have actually had it just as a Zoom meeting rather than a webinar. Hey, Adam, good to have you on board. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and ask any questions you can ask either in the Q&A or in the chat. By the sounds of it, from Mark's introduction of you, I feel like you should be running this webinar, not me. Anyway, for best experience, I'm using OBS, so I'm not sharing my screen. So if you want to see the slides, the best thing is going to have me in full speaker mode rather than gallery mode. So the agenda for tonight's conversation really is what is an overview? What is the metaverse, or what people are calling the metaverse? Where does it come from? And there are slight different takes on what the metaverse is and components of the metaverse. And then we'll look at a brief technology glossary. The reason I chucked that in is because a lot of the people who registered to come to the webinar don't know a lot about the technology. They probably couldn't describe the difference between AR and VR to you, or AI, blockchain, NFTs, 5G, etc. Then really just having a look at the technology roadmap for the metaverse as intended to eventuate. Obviously, the technologies aren't in place at the moment. And then a couple of questions around what are the social implications and what are the financial implications. So that's the agenda. Before we start, has anybody got any questions at all? And that includes you, Aria. If you've got any questions, any burning questions you want to drop in there, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, I might just introduce myself and Aria and then move on.
None from me at the moment.
Yeah. It's always interesting on a webinar because in a live presentation, you say, are there any questions? And you can see by the reactions of people in the room whether somebody's going to ask you a question, and you can wait and ask it. But on a webinar, of course, I can't see anybody's reactions. And then there's the technology lag as well. You know, I'm hastily trying to type a question. So, okay, I'm going to take it that there are no questions. So let's just very quickly move on to the next slide. All right, so who am I? I'm the good-looking chap on the left of your screen, probably also on the right of your screen, rather than the four pictures of the chap in the middle who's far better looking than I am. I've been in IT since not long after I left high school. I left high school to go and spend 2 years in the South African Air Force. And then I came out of that and worked for a bank for a while, and then I ended up becoming a computer programmer. And that was back in the 80s. So I was, as you can imagine, programming in those days. This is pre-PC. So I was programming green screens, mainframes. I've been around since that long. Yes, it's true. I've worked in 11 countries and 22 cities. The main countries where I've been based have been South Africa, the USA, the UK, Australia. And Australia has really been the last 23 odd years. A lot of my role while I've been working here, though, has been for companies like Microsoft, Compaq, HP, Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and I've had ANZ roles for a lot of that time, ANZ or global roles. My most recent corporate role was CTO for innovation at Hewlett Packard Enterprise Services. And I started that role in about 2014. I started at HPE back in 2011. So that's 11 years ago now. In 2014, I took over the CTO for innovation role. And I've really been working since then with emerging technologies, and AR and VR became a very big part of that. AR, VR, IoT, drones, robots, software robots, AI, big data AI, machine learning, really, but AR and VR was a very big part of that probably since about 2015. And I run a startup that will be 5 years old at the end of June. We're called ACHIEVR, and we basically help companies solve training challenges using augmented and virtual reality, mainly virtual reality. We've been in VR, in interactive VR, since 2017. So that's a little bit about my background. I'll let Arya introduce himself.
Thank you, Roger. So I know Adam pretty well from wearing hats of different shapes and sizes. Been also lived and worked in quite a few countries and cities. But I think that most relevant for this conversation is that I did my first augmented reality project in 2007. And that was in the world of advertising with first General Electric and then Fanta under the Coca-Cola brand. And one of the reasons why I wanted to join this conversation today is that, Roger and I have discussed and been working in the world of VR since near the beginning of ACHIEVR. And
before the beginning of ACHIEVR.
Before the beginning of ACHIEVR. And the aside from a few practical applications in augmented reality, like being able to try on a pair of sunglasses that you may want to purchase, or a magic mirror, which we envisioned back in 2012, that a couple different brands have done, where you can actually try on makeup. If you're a man or a woman, it doesn't really matter. Some of the different snap filters that you can use. Not much has been done, and there's been a lot of mention about the potential financial outcome in this space, and I think that it's good to have a real conversation about where we are today. I do think it's not a question of if, but when. But that win is dependent on a lot of factors. And I think that we're going to get into that today. I'm a very firm believer of all things reality, be it extended, virtual, mixed, augmented. I think that there's a future to be had. But as a good mate of mine recently mentioned, he's interested in purchasing some VR hardware to get into it. We're not there yet. And I think that's part of what we're going to talk about today. But let me turn it back over to you, Raj, and we'll continue the conversation.
No, I think that's brilliant. Thanks. And thanks, Adam and Mark, for your intros. As I mentioned earlier, we've had something like 18 registrations, the vast majority from this group of high school friends that I mentioned, and not a single one of them are on. The reason I'm doing this at 8 p.m. on a Sunday is because it's noon on Sunday in South Africa at the moment, or 11 a.m. So it's a good time for them. Okay, so what is the metaverse? So here's what Mark Zuckerberg said back in October. We believe the metaverse will be the successor to the mobile internet. And there's a lot to be unpacked, even just from that introduction. He then went on to talk about it being the way that people will collaborate as if they're in the same room with people. But this successor to the mobile internet, and specifically the fact that he called out the mobile internet, is actually quite key, because if you look at all of the companies who are very bullish on the metaverse. Obviously, Meta now they used to be called Facebook, but now Meta. Microsoft is very bullish on it. NVIDIA, Adobe, then of course all of the game engines, Unity, Unreal, etc. And then all of the cryptocurrency, blockchain, NFT purveyors, they're very big on the metaverse. There's a bunch of virtual land companies or VR land companies, VR spaces, collaboration spaces, everything from the work ones like Spatial and Glue and Meet in VR to the social ones like Rec Room and Altspace, which is owned by Microsoft. What's the other one? VR Chat. And then there's a couple of
VR.
There's Decentraland, and there's another one as well, which is very big, which is kind of like virtual land and NFT / crypto. So all of these companies are all very bullish on the metaverse is the next thing. So the question then to ask is, who are the companies that aren't so bullish on the metaverse? And you've heard nothing from Google, you've heard nothing from Apple, you've heard nothing from Samsung. Obviously, the HTC is in on it with the HTC Vive.
They have to. HP.
You've heard nothing from Sony, even though they've got Sony PSVR. And so you then have another look at the statement and you go, all of the companies that are very big in mobile, who actually caught the wave from the mobile, wave of the internet, aren't the ones who actually worried about the future of the internet. And all of the companies that lost out on that mobile wave are the companies that are very bullish. So if you look, Qualcomm doesn't really talk about the metaverse at all, even though they are the processor that are in all the AR and VR headsets, but they're also the processor that are in all the phones, right? Apart from the Apple Silicon, whereas NVIDIA does, because NVIDIA's got nothing down on the phones. So it's a very, very interesting analysis to do, is to see who are the companies that are actually investing and are actually very bullish. And the other interesting thing about that is you can be wholly invested in AR and VR and still not be bullish about the metaverse. The future of AR and VR is not dependent on us having a metaverse. The future of crypto and NFTs and the internet itself and AI and cloud and IoT and digital twins, none of that is dependent on there being a metaverse. So to say that the metaverse is the inevitable outcome of this roadmap, I think is, it's not necessarily premature. I think there's an agenda behind it. And so that's why I say it's probably going to be somewhere in between the cynical, wired point of view and the sort of the very optimistic, technophilic, not technophilic, sort of metaverse-philic Forbes point of view. Okay, so what about the metaverse versus Web 3.0? Because the metaverse is used as a catch-all. It's used as a catch-all in two areas. The one area it's used as a catch-all is in the alphabet soup that is augmented reality, virtual reality, extended reality, mixed reality, blah, 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 blah. Like, we are sick. I've been running this company for 5 years, and I'm sick of trying to say we do AR, VR, XR, MR solutions. Like, it's really cool to be able to just go, we do metaverse solutions. We do training in the metaverse. That's what we do. We help you sort out your health and safety training, and we do it with metaverse technologies. That's a very shallow kind of viewpoint or superficial viewpoint. But the metaverse has become a catch-all for the imminent future of AR and VR. And there's an optimism baked into that, using the metaverse as a catch-all. The metaverse is also used as a catch-all for Web 3.0, but they're actually quite different in the same way that social media is different to Web 2.0, in the same way that the web, or not the web, but search was different to Web 1.0. Web 1.0, thanks Tim Berners-Lee and HTML and HTTP, PP and linking, gave us an internet where you could read, and companies could put up static web pages. They became pretty, not interactive, but they became pretty animated pretty soon with Macromedia Flash. Anybody remember Flash? We all hated Flash. And then Microsoft came up with Silverlight, and then we got ASB and blah, blah, blah. But back in the day, we used to dial up with modems. When I first came to Australia, moving from the UK, I spent my last 3 weeks installing modems in all my friends' houses so they could connect with us over the internet and they could send emails and things. This was in the days before you could even blog. Google took over from Alta Vista from search. Yahoo was still the biggest, most highest cap value company on the internet. They bought Flickr, and that's where we started seeing search because of backlinks and URLs and links. And then came along sort of in the early noughts, Java became JavaScript, and now you could start doing some pretty cool stuff on HTML with JavaScript and CSS, and you could start doing things like user-generated content. Once in 2006, we saw the launch of Facebook and Twitter, and I think Instagram was pretty close to there. We saw the launch of the iPhone in 2007. Prior to that, PDAs were taking photos, but they were crappy. And but the mobile phone, the iPhone, really launched the internet in everybody's pocket and gave them a camera that they could take photos with, so they could now upload their own content. JavaScript gave the big companies or companies like Facebook and cloud, of course. So decoupling physical infrastructure from virtual infrastructure, and then having cloud services like Amazon Web Services, allowing people to scale very, very quickly and not have to go and buy servers and things. So cloud and social media and smartphones all led to what we call Web 2.0. And the whole thing about Web 2.0 is not only can you read content on the web, but you can write content to the web. And we saw things like Blogger and WordPress, and obviously Facebook and Instagram. We even had things like MySpace and Friendster. There were a whole bunch of companies that actually did go bust as well. And then the whole point about Web 3.0 is it's this not only can you read and write on the internet, but you can actually own. So rather than a company like Facebook owning your data or owning your data, and owning your relationships and collaborations, you can actually, the idea is that with Web 3.0 is that you can actually own them yourselves. So you can own not only your own domain names, but you can own your own platforms. You could create your own currency if you wanted to. You could own your own virtual space, digital assets that you buy, you can mint as NFTs, and then you can own them rather than a company like Facebook owning them. It's not actually quite as clear cut as that. I'm sure you guys you probably know, Adam and Mark, you probably know even more than I do, but it's pretty messy out there. And this concept, that people can own their own things without needing the prerequisite technical savvy to be able to do things like, I don't know, own crypto wallets and program NFTs and things. Yes, you can do them on platforms, but you pay for that, right? And you could have to sell them on that platform, or you have to have your own crypto wallet and be able to secure that and translate that. It's not quite as clear cut. Certainly from the investigations that I've done, it's not quite like doing a post on Facebook and having your own web page as a business on Facebook, and then just creating your own content. Yes, Facebook owns that content, but to do that with blockchain and NFTs and things is not quite as, certainly not yet anyway. What do you want to say? Yeah.
If I could interject, I think where blockchain technology and NFTs, and for that matter, digital twins and cryptocurrency come in is that there is a framework for ownership
Yep.
that has been established, and there is the ledgers and being able to actually an immutable recording of activity, and the fact that now is something that globally, irregardless of the boundary and the geography you live in, that it creates a framework for ownership in that digital space that wasn't really there before. And so, like, from the metaverse perspective, of like owning something in a space that isn't necessarily linked to a meter by meter land equivalent, like that's there. As you said, though, we're so far from having any sort of like ubiquitous means of transacting. It's super messy.
To decode it, and they were interviewing a professor of law, a professor emeritus of law, who actually lectures on this. I can't remember which university it was. Something with a P, wasn't Princeton. Anyway, Pennsylvania, I think University of Pennsylvania, and she was basically going, yeah, it's all very well, but we actually do have a framework. We have a legal framework. We have contractual frameworks. We have copyright frameworks. We have IP frameworks. There is nothing here, and also none of these blockchain, smart contracts, NFTs, actually consider the legal frameworks that we have. So when you start looking at something like DAOs, right, digital or autonomous or decentralized autonomous organizations, and there was a DAO that was set up to buy the US Constitution recently, and they raised $40 million, $42 million, and it went for $43 million. So they lost out, right? And people were paying more for gas fees to buy their tokens in the DAO, and there was no contractual governance at all, right? So when they didn't buy the Constitution, there was no contractual reason for them to be paid back the money that they'd paid to this DAO. Now, the guys are doing the right thing and they're paying them back and everything else, or they're saving the money for something else, for another project.
Minus the gas fees.
It was a, sure, it's enshrined in the DAO what the Go thing is, but it's not enshrined in law. So, and how many NFT scams have we seen? How many coins have we seen, like this Squid Games coin that was created, and people just pump and dump, right? And they leave. So the, like I say, it's not, I'm a techno optimist. I have been my entire career, my entire life, but it's messy at the moment. And I don't think it's all as it seems. Me thinks the emperor doesn't have quite as many clothes as he thinks, as he likes to say that he has. Adam. In fact, I wonder if is there a way I can just promote you to? I'm going to
answer live. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
There you go.
Giving you guys both opportunities to join in and.
Thanks, Roger. Thanks, Arye. Sorry, the camera's not working. It must be something in the browser setting, but I'll sort that out in a minute.
So much for being a photographer.
Yeah. Well, photography is just one of my many vices, but I've never actually managed to generate much income from it. It's always been a hobby as opposed to a source of sustainable income.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Videography.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. My point of view on this is that as a creative or a photographer, that NFTs through the smart contracts actually bring back value to creators, which was taken away by Web 2.0. So obviously when in the early stages of web, even web 1.5, should we say, when, content sharing platforms like Napster and things came out, and Pirate Bay and all of the sites where you could basically get a piece of content for free whether it was a full-length movie or whether it was a song or whether it was an album or whatever it happened to be. So that was the beginning of where creatives like really lost their skin, right? That all of that value and all of their ownership and their creativity, even though it was exploited by agents and agencies and things like that, was literally taken away.
I'm not sure. So I'm not sure that they did lose their skin, right? So what I totally agree with you that there was a lot of piracy, and there's still some piracy, right? But I remember back in '93, and people introduced me to MP3s, and I've got a very good friend who actually worked for I think it was River Records, and his job was basically to put contracts together for soundtracks for movies, right? So that's what he basically did all of the contracts for soundtracks for movies. And I said to him, there's going to be people don't want to break the law, but when they're faced with paying $30 or £30 for a CD when they only want one song, they're going to download one song for free. Whereas if you charge just £1 for that song, they would pay the pound for the song. And if we look at what happened, and then I remember when I was at Microsoft back in early 2005, and I was going like, why are we paying $10,000 to fill an iPod when you could just stick all those songs in the cloud and people could pay a subscription and they could stream it, right? And bit prescient, but we needed the iPhone for that to reel. And if you look now, there's hardly any piracy, and people just pay $10 a month for Netflix, right? And they download things. And if you look at the digital rights holders, the creatives, I don't think they're making any less than they were in the days when they had to go through agents and things. So and then to the point of NFTs giving you this ability to make more money. So I've looked at it as not only as a photographer, but as an author as well. And I'm not convinced that is actually the case, because you can still make a full digital copy of that. You can still pirate the thing. Just because you have an NFT embedded in the code doesn't mean you can't pirate it. Just means that you're not. It's like you can still copy a Rolex and put a serial number on the back of it. It's just not it's not the serial number.
It's the value of owning the original, and that's kind of where that comes in.
Right. So right, for sales, for people selling it, I'm not sure.
I haven't quite finished the full.
Sorry.
I was going to say. I agree with you that I don't think creators are making any less. Because it's given them more platforms to access their content. So obviously, if you have more places to be monetized or incentivized or rewarded for your creativity, then the better, right? So that's the democracy of what the internet is.
Yeah.
But where I was going with this is that for the creators themselves, there's a certain incentive to create if you know that you're going to get paid dividends down the line. And that's one of the benefits that NFTs bring, that every time the NFT is sold, you can factor into that contract that you get a commission of the sale, which also becomes like a repeating source of revenue over time.
That's right. There is that benefit. So there is that theoretical benefit. I've read plenty of white papers about how this would work. I haven't actually seen it work yet. And I follow a bunch of self-publishing podcasts. So, because the idea here is authors as well, right? They could put an NFT on every page of their book, and every time you open it in your Kindle, so you're only paying cents per page, but it works out to which still works out to less than the $30 for the book or whatever, $15 for the book. But it just means that every time you read it, they're getting paid, right? And every time you give the book to somebody, the digital book to somebody, they're getting paid, or you sell the digital book or whatever. And the same as you say with photographs. And I know that there are NFL teams in the US that are looking at this as well to stop scalping or to make money from scalping. So, you know, somebody buys a ticket to an NFL game, they pay $100, they sell it for $400. The NFL team doesn't get that $300 differential, right? Just the scalper does. And if those tickets have got an NFT embedded in them, then, you know, they make the money every time every time it gets unsold, right? So yes, I've seen, like I say, I've seen it theoretically. It makes sense, but I haven't actually seen it in the wild yet. I'd be interested if you have. I don't know if you've seen it in the wild.
I think it's still very early days, because you've got to have you've got to have an aftermarket for that to justify itself. So it's not just the original sale. You've got to sell it 2, 3, 4 X infinite number of times, and it's still too early for that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Suffice to say, I'll go back to the slideshow. Suffice to say, the metaverse, the Web 3.0 forms part of the metaverse, but the metaverse isn't Web 3.0. So by that I mean, one of the things about the metaverse is this extensibility or transitivity. So the idea is, at the moment, if I catch an Uber, I have an identity with Uber, and I've got my credit cards with Uber, and I've got a rating on Uber, 4.87, I think, or 4.9, or whatever. But if I go to Airbnb, I need another identity, and it's another directory, and I have another rating. Hopefully my Airbnb rating is as good as my Uber rating. And if I go to eBay, I've got another identity and another rating, and blah, blah, blah. And so it goes on, right? And the whole idea of the metaverse is that you can have transitive ratings. So if I've got a good credit score and I've got a good social rating on Uber, it translates to Airbnb. And this really comes from, it starts with the whole idea of transitive assets. So if I buy, I don't know, a skin on Fortnite, the game Fortnite, and I have an avatar in Facebook, the whole idea of the metaverse is that these are all affiliated. And because of NFTs, we can now take an asset from one, let's call it universe, digital universe, to another digital universe that's connected to the metaverse. And this is all transitive. So the whole idea of the metaverse is that we actually need blockchain or some equivalent way of having a federated, transitive way of transferring not only assets, but identities, avatars, and ratings, social ratings, credit scores,
data,
things like that. And so, and again, early days, and I'm not sure where I fit on the spectrum of being happy about needing that. And I find it really interesting because I come from South Africa, and in South Africa you have an identity book, and in your ID book you've got every single license that you could ever have: your marriage license, your dog license, your firearm license, your driver's license. It's got your fingerprints, it's got your photograph. It's got your birth certificates. It's one book that gives you this identity for pretty much everything that you need to do. The benefit is you don't need a Medicare card and a driver's license and a passport and everything else, right? It's all in one document. The disadvantage is if somebody steals your identity or even just your ID book, you're screwed. You can't actually identify yourself, and you can't transact, and you can't open a bank account, and you can't do anything. And I was very, very kind of like, the convenience of that single transitive identity made a lot of sense because that's how I was brought up. But actually, now that I've been working in IT and I've worked in cybersecurity and privacy, I'm kind of looking at this and going, actually, I like the idea that I need a passport from a country. And I've actually got a passport in the UK and a passport in Australia. and that my driver's license isn't tied to my passport. So if I lose my driver's license, I don't get points knocked off my passport, and it's different to my Medicare card. Now, federation, absolutely. I'm all for federation. I'm all for user-controlled federation. So I wasn't necessarily opposed to, for example, the electronic health record. I was opposed to the way they were implementing the electronic health record. But the concept of a user-controlled health record that could be used throughout all of the health systems and healthcare providers makes a lot of sense. Now, the blockchain would probably be pretty good for that, except that things on the blockchain are open for everybody to see. So do I really want my identity to be on a blockchain that is readable by anybody? And the answer is no. So we come full circle to to this, the technology that we need to underpin this transitive trust, I think, is more complex than the bullish people on NFT and blockchain. And I'd be interested in your thoughts, Adam and Mark, and Aria, of course.
I would just like to throw in, when we talk about the metaverse, when we talk about this ubiquitous connected world of worlds, where you have, Zuckerberg's Meta, where already law is questionable. How do you have a single set of laws and ways of engaging in this virtual space when there isn't necessarily a ubiquitous police force, unless you have AI that is developed to have that universal view and vantage of everything happening, and that you have you're going to have different worlds where different laws exist and different people can enter and choose to go into those places, and you may pay a fee, it may be free, but it's more likely to be more of a second lifestyle, wild west, where things are crazy in some places, in some places things are very calm, versus what we have today in the real world, which is a clear understanding of law and order, and if you break the law, you are going to get penalized.
Because I'm not sure we do have a very clear understanding of law and order.
No, but to you get to that point, though, you got to have.
We have laws.
Yeah, we have laws.
We have a justice system, and we have lawyers, and we have courts, and we have people that enforce those laws. And as soon as you step beyond the sovereignty of nation states, where do you go, right? So we've got national law, but
sovereignty of
law
Meta
really is only been written for things like war crimes and money laundering and things like that. It hasn't been written for domestic violence or even workplace harassment. There's no law, international law about that. So and already there are plenty of articles of people being harassed in the metaverse, in virtual worlds, virtual universes, and to the point that Facebook has already put in an ability for you to put a collider around yourself, right? So you can create your own virtual space, and that's that's just a very small sort of this hasn't sorted itself out yet. But I think there's a bigger issue at play. I might just I'm guessing that everybody on the call is pretty happy with the technologies. I noticed we're at 10 to 9 already, so I'm going to skip through this. But pretty much, if we look at the mobile internet as it is today, we've come from PCs and laptops with discrete applications and discrete directories and things, over public telephone networks to cellular networks, and we've got satellite in there as well. But we've still got a lot of broadband, right? That's came from cabled telecommunications networks. We've now got the cloud, where we had things on premise before on servers. We have fiat currencies, and the whole idea of the metaverse is that all of these things evolve, right? So the cloud becomes this super sort of multi-parallel processing AI. The networks go to, you've got Starlink and satellite networks, and of course 5G, because we need massive amounts of bandwidth if we're going to do immersive computing. The presentation layer moves from 2D flat displays to basically strapping those displays onto your head. But by putting them on your head with things like AMUs and everything else, you can now either immerse yourself in the world, so virtual reality, or you can have digital assets in your real space, so augmented reality. And then the idea is that all of these discrete apps all connect to each other. And as I mentioned earlier, the blockchain allows you to secure things and have transitive security. And then currencies, we move from fiat currencies to a digital, and if we're looking at digital currencies, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum and even the altcoins are probably far better than any other form of digital currency, and they're based on the blockchain. So that's the stack. I don't know if there's anything anybody feels I've missed. Anything that you think I've missed, Aria or Adam or Mark? Yeah, go Adam. I
just had a quick one. Thanks for explaining that sort of evolution as well. Just as you were talking, it made me think, does the metaverse really need blockchain, or is blockchain just a way of providing security and identity or governance within the metaverse? So I guess the question is, could the metaverse already be in existence and it's in its current form, and then blockchain will just make it better? Or does the metaverse not exist without blockchain as its underlying mechanism, or proof of stake, or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah. So the answer is yes and no. The metaverse. So I don't believe the metaverse exists at this stage right now. Not in the way that has been described, and certainly, I mean, the term metaverse comes from a 30-year-old book by Neil Stephenson, very prescient book, nevertheless, called Snow Crash, and is kind of idolized in other movies like, and the most recent one, of course, is Ready Player One, right? So we saw Ready Player One, what was that, 2 years ago now? And The Matrix. So none of these depictions of the metaverse, so they all depict an interconnected, immersive future of the web, right? So this is the way that we will interact with people and with information in the future. This is the description. It implies that we have some way to authenticate ourselves and to identify ourselves, to secure things, and it implies that we have some way to exchange value, i.e. a currency, to store and exchange value. Right now, to do that outside of fiat currencies, blockchain is really, or Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies are really the only way that you can exchange and store value in a truly transitive manner, cross-border transitive manner. They are still reliant at the moment on fiat currencies. I own a bunch of blockchain, and it's now sitting at literally half the value of what it was when I bought it in November.
Join the club.
Yeah. I mean, all of us are there, right? And I'm feeling that pain, and I'm feeling that pain because I actually trust the value of the dollar more than I trust the value of the Bitcoin, if that makes sense. Probably because I can't use the Bitcoin, right? People don't pay my company in Bitcoin, even though we've got customers all over the world, and I don't pay my contractors in Bitcoin. I have offered it, and they've all declined. And all of these guys are programmers developing on the blockchain and developing in AR and VR and stuff. So the answer to your question is, I think we need a way to store and exchange value. So we need a currency. a digital currency that is tied into the security and the privacy of the metaverse. And the best candidate for that from a technical perspective right now is blockchain, or a blockchain-based currency like Bitcoin or Ethereum. But that doesn't mean that that is necessarily the way. One of the things that I follow a bunch of people on cryptos, and one of the things that's really interesting is the only truly decentralized currency at the moment is probably Bitcoin. Ethereum is not as decentralized as Bitcoin. And a lot of these altcoins aren't decentralized at all. They claim to be decentralized. They can be decentralized, but that decentralized ledger is all running on a bunch of computers in a single data center. So, you know, virtually they're decentralized, but they're not actually decentralized across the world, which is a massive risk, right? When you start looking at cryptocurrencies. So, yeah. All right. I might just, I'm happy to go to about 9:15 if everybody's happy to do that.
Sounds good.
Yep. Okay, cool.
I've got probably about 5 minutes, so I'd love to see a bit more of the slides, but
okay,
yeah,
so I'll
that's all right.
run through these very quickly. So augmented reality we've had for closing on about 60 years now. In the digital world, not quite so long, but essentially putting digital artifacts in the real world. It can be line of sight. It can be through hearing as well. People talk about AR through line of sight. So some kind of heads-up display or near-eye display, glasses. We've seen AR, of course, on tablets and smartphones, excuse me, with AR Kit and AR Core. Pokemon Go is an example of AR. And the idea is that you can bring digital artifacts into the real world. One of the things that people don't realize is AR is turn-by-turn directions from their GPS in your headset, right, or in your ears. That's AR as well. And there are quite a few AR companies that do guided tours just using GPS and earphones, right? Giving you basically like an interactive podcast. There was a game called Zombie Run to help you run. And it was basically like as you were running, you could hear zombies behind you, chasing you and things like that to increase your running. Okay, so yeah, this is a slide. Okay. So holographic computing, also known as mixed reality. Microsoft calls it holographic computing. So the guy's wearing a HoloLens there. He's actually seeing this fan on this engine or this wheel. And the idea of mixed reality is it's a digital artifact with physical properties. So that fan will spin and is linked or locked to this object. And would be occluded by something in front of it and would occlude something behind it. And if you push this off the table onto the floor, it would respond to gravity, right? So it's a digital artifact, but it's got physical properties like reflection and locking in space, tracking, and occlusion and gravity and all of that. Or it's a physical artifact with digital properties. So if you think about wearing a VR headset, and then seeing your couch in VR and being able to sit on that couch, that would be mixed reality as well. So it's literally just mixing augmented and virtual reality. Okay, and then virtual reality is literally a total immersion, total sensory immersion in a virtual environment. Usually it's accomplished by putting on a VR headset and then headphones. And then we've got other things as well now. There's a suit called a Tesla suit made by a company called Tesla suit that actually give you haptic feedback as well. A very good friend of mine, one of our advisors, runs the Empathic Computing Lab at the University of South Australia. He's doing things like transferring pulse and heart rate from firefighters in a fire situation to their commander, they've got a 360 camera on top of their helmet. The captain can see everything around them, can see where they're looking as well, and can feel their pulse through his suit, right? So, you know, it's not just audio and visual, there's haptic as well. So, okay, blockchains we've spoken about. essentially the blockchain is a distributed ledger. So instead of it being a database on a single computer or a single set of computers, this database is spread across thousands or even millions of computers. And then every time a transaction is done, it needs to be verified by by a bunch of more than 50% of the computers on that network. And when it's verified, that transaction is written onto a block that is then shared with all of those computers. So that transaction can never be repudiated or refuted because it's cryptographically included in the block, and it's just added another block to that chain. Cryptocurrency. So this basically describes how a blockchain transaction works. Transactions entered, it's transmitted to all of these computers. They basically solve equations to prove that the transaction is valid. Once it's valid, they write it to the block. These blocks are then chained, and then the transaction is complete. And all of these computers have got all of the chains of the block as well. So when the next transaction happens, they add a block to the next, they add a block to the next block in the chain. NFTs, so it's a non-fungible token. So the idea of if I bought a Bitcoin and I bought another Bitcoin, I could, or if I sold you a Bitcoin, I could, they're fungible. They're like dollars. If I have one $10 note and another $10 note, I can get the same value from them. The whole idea of an NFT is that it's cryptographically secured in the asset so that you can prove who owns that actual asset. All right. I don't think I need to describe anymore. So virtual worlds and real estate, this was started years ago, late 90s, I think. Second Life came out, maybe early 2000s. Maybe early 2000s.
Yeah, like early 2000s.
And it was massive, and they had their own currency called Linden dollars. And companies like IBM and HP all had, land in Second Life, and Second Life is still going today. I don't know if you can go into Second Life in VR, but the whole idea of these virtual worlds is that you can enter them. You can even enter them via your desktop now, and you have an avatar, and you can actually buy space in this land, and people are spending thousands, almost millions of dollars buying space, buying real estate that are now going to be their shop front. And then the idea is that people can come and buy goods from their shop front. But I'm reminded back in the 90s, before the dot-com bust, how many people thought that we were going to lose brick and mortar stores because of the internet, and everybody was only going to buy stuff on the internet. And you know what? My wife went to Aldi today, right? Like, we can buy groceries on the internet. We've been able to do that for 20 years. And she still goes to a retail store, and people still go to clothing stores, and they still go to, and yes, there are many e-commerce stores that are online that don't have a physical retail front, but equally there are just as many retail stores, and even the largest companies, e-commerce companies, Amazon has retail stores, and Apple has retail stores, and Microsoft has retail stores. And so I don't think that there will be, I don't think that all of the big stores, the multinationals, will go to metaverse only. I think they will have metaverse stores or virtual reality stores, and they will have online stores, and they will have retail stores. And yes, I'm sure we'll have just e-commerce stores, and we will have just metaverse stores in the same way that we have people who run stores on Amazon, or they run stores on eBay, or they run stores on Shopify, or whatever. Yeah, go.
I have to go. Gentlemen, thank you. I will watch the remaining parts tomorrow morning. Have a good night.
No worries. Thanks, Arya.
Hey, sorry.
Okay, so rushing through this, I couldn't help but put this slide up. What's real right now? So what is real right now from a metaverse? Certainly from if I go back to the tech stack slide. This one. There are AR and VR devices right now. As I say, I've been running a VR startup for the last 5 years, and we've been doing solutions from day one using virtual reality. The hard truth about virtual reality is, despite 10 million Oculus Quests being sold, and Sony coming out with PSVR 2, and HTC Vive and the HTC Vive Focus, which is their standalone headset, and the Pico Neo 3, which is their standalone headset, it doesn't come within, it doesn't come anywhere close to the number of smartphones that are out there, or the number of tablets that are out there. And one of the things that we've learned doing this gig is that doing a SaaS startup where you're doing a mobile app or you're doing a web app is relatively easy, because people know how to use their smartphones and they know how to use their browsers. And so even if you've got some kind of complex process, it's very easy to onboard people. They know how to use a mouse and a keyboard. They know how to use their finger and touch. They know how to use their camera and scan QR codes and things. What people don't know how to do is how to teleport and to use a controller that they can't see inside of VR, and how to navigate through a story in VR. And it's no mistake at all that VR started in the gaming world, because gamers do inherently know how to use controllers, because they use controllers all the time, and they know how to do things like teleport because they've been playing first-person games in a 3D world. Even though they haven't been immersed in that world, they've been playing in a 3D world, in a 3D map for the better part of 20 years, 20, 25 years. When did Doom come out, right? So, but the gamers form a very, very small part of component of, subset of the people who use computing. And so from a technology usage perspective, AR and VR is just not ready for mainstream yet. And I would say VR is closest, but the headsets, the batteries go flat after about 2 hours. Mobile processors aren't really cutting it, so you can't do really, really complex things. You certainly can't twin the world in any real way. AR is even further away. There are just laws of physics challenges that we have that we haven't overcome yet. There's divergence accommodation conflict. So this is where the way your eyes work is they converge, your pupils converge on an item, and then the lenses focus. So that's the convergence and the accommodation. And where if you put a digital artifact in glasses, in something like the HoloLens, and it is behind something else, your eyes are converging at a further distance than the item actually is, because it's only an inch from your face. And so there's a disconnect in your head where something is meant to be blurred or meant to be in focus, and it's not, because everything's at infinite focus. And so that requires something called light field or volumetric displays. And we don't have volumetric displays. Magic Leap was the company closest to doing volumetric displays. They reckoned that they were going to come, they had $8 billion that they raised, and they've pretty much given up that quest. And they've got a couple of, I think the Magic Leap 1 has got 2 waveguides in it. And I think the Magic Leap 2 has just come out. And I think that might only have 1 waveguide in it. It doesn't have anything like volumetric displays. So, the word on the street is that Apple are going to be the ones that overcome this challenge, and they're going to overcome the divergence accommodation conflict. But then there's other just standard laws of physics issues, like how do you get a processor small enough and powerful enough that doesn't generate too much heat so you can wear it on your head all day? How do you get it small enough to be in a light pair of glasses? How do you power that? What do you do about batteries? How do you get batteries into a pair of glasses that can power something all day, and connectivity, right? So now you need a 5G chip in there as well. Oh, by the way, you're running a camera, and you need enough performance to do computer vision. You need to do SLAM, surface localization and mapping. There's just a bunch of things that, if you look at the best technology we have at the moment, if you look at the HoloLens 2, it's a big clunky device that you don't want to wear for more than, 45 minutes really. And certainly nobody's wearing that on the bus or the train anytime soon, right? Same again for the Magic Leap displays, and same again for things like the VR displays. So that the technology roadmap, now we've got Moore's law, and absolutely, if we go to, if we look at Moore's law, things will get smaller, things will get lighter, things will get more performant, and battery technology will improve. And I've actually got a pair of these glasses. This is the Epson Mavaria glasses. They look totally ridiculous. They don't do anything like holographic computing. All they do is they put an Android desktop in front of your vision, probably about, it's probably like an HD desktop that's a couple of arm lengths away. And that's kind of, really the status of AR. VR has moved from being tethered to a big PC to being standalone. And I have no doubt that that VR headsets will become smaller and lighter and more resolution and bigger fields of view. At the moment, you've got an issue, just a content issue as well, for collaboration. So if you listen to John Carmack's keynote at the last Connect, and he's the CTO, he was the CTO for Oculus, and he's the CTO, the consultant CTO for Meta. And he talks about, not being able to have any real content with more than about 16 to 20 people in a room, 16 to 20 avatars in a room. So you're not going to have, a 10,000 person stadium watching a football match, or a concert, or even a 200 person town hall for a company, right? Not anytime soon. Part of that is bandwidth, part of that is processing power, GPU performance. Now, if you look at Apple Silicon and you look at the M1 and the M1 Ultra and whatever they're going to come up with next, the M2 chip, you can see where Moore's law is going to drive that performance. If we look at things like 5G and what's going to come up with 6G, we can see networks that are going to drive that as well, right? If we start looking at what they're doing with lithium, not lithium ion, what's the silicon batteries, and getting, performance density to above 40 kilowatt hours per kilogram, which is kind of research that's being done in aviation and in electrical vehicles. We can see that they'll get to batteries that can last all day and power these things. So I can see a line of sight to a world where we can have mainstream AR and VR. VR probably for work and some kind of entertainment, recreation, and AR for your daily going about transacting and driving and things. But I think it's probably the better part of a decade away from that, right? 5 years to a decade.
Hey, Roger, it's Mark here. Thanks for the presentation so far. Very insightful. I have a story to share on the AR part, which is quite interesting. So my perspective is that, yes, I think trying to take AR to the real world and enforce it to, I guess, have a use case and unlock a consumer-based use case, we're still too early for that. Yep. And you saw with Google trying to release Google Glasses, I think 5-6 years ago, and it flopped because the consumer market didn't see the value in it yet.
It was 9 years ago.
Yeah, 9 years ago, right? And then I thought when I saw it, I was like, this is going to be the big thing. But then, it flopped, obviously. Then similarly, I did a research project related to AR, which is how to, on the context of workers who work in an oil and gas situation. So imagine in an oil rig, and you're trying to fix machines. Right now, the way they do things is they use paper documentation, completely paper. If they want to read about a machine, they have to find the paper, they have to read it, learn about it before fixing the machine. So the question is, how do you digitize that information and put it on a smartwatch so that they can see it, live whilst they're fixing the machine? And even that, I found it was an uphill battle to convince the workers to change the way they work and move to digital means. So I guess my point is, it's interesting that in a lot of the operations, especially heavy infrastructure and oil and gas and everything, you'd be surprised by how behind they are in terms of innovation, in terms of digitizing how to do things. So it's kind of like, well, they got to get there first before they get to AI and VR. So there's sort of, and I think that, resonates with your point, is that there is a curve that they need to go up first before they can adopt this as a technology. And one interesting use case I definitely think has a big application for AR is how can you use AR technology such as Google Glasses to increase spatial awareness for workers who work in hazardous environments? How can that, give them warnings about different parts of the environment whilst they're doing the work? And we're starting to see a lot of this happening, even with truck drivers. Nowadays, they've got like something called HoloLens, I forgot the name, but it kind of tracks, their speed on the truck, and it tracks anything weird any hazards that might be coming up in front of the truck, but also tracks their eye and whether they're, falling asleep, because that's one of the leading causes of, truck accidents, is because they fall asleep. So I think from a hazard reduction perspective, I think AR's got a huge potential in that space.
Yeah, look, AR's got, even now, and I've got a colleague who back in 2015, I did a podcast episode interview with him, and he reckoned that we were going to have wearable mainstream AR in the mainstream in 6 months. That was in 2015. And he runs a company that does, and they use technology like the RealWear HMT1, I think it's called. And it's basically a monocular AR display that is attached to a hard hat, and it's used in the construction industry, right? So to give you exactly what you're talking about, to give people telemetry about information that they need, and whether it's, being able to see the spec diagrams or whatever, if they're working on the side of a jet engine, or if it's to see hazards, or if it's to see tension loads on a crane that's doing something in a construction site. And then the whole idea of the HoloLens with holographic computing is that you can actually have remote experts as well helping you, and they can literally just draw in space around what you're working on. So you could imagine somebody doing surgery wearing a HoloLens. He can actually overlay the X-ray or the CAT scan over the body while he's doing the operation. Somebody else, an expert in another hospital, can be seeing what he's seeing, and then talking to him while he's doing it, and then highlighting around the body exactly where he needs to do things. That we can do that today. We've actually got the technology to do all of that right now. And this really brings me to the next slide. So thanks for that, Mark, which is, what are the social implications, right? And the social implications, as we've mentioned already, is there is just, from a user perspective, people don't know how to navigate content, digital content in a 3D world, in an immersive spatial computing world. Now, will that change? Of course it'll change. People didn't know how to use touchscreens and smartphones until 2007. And people didn't know how to use keyboards, not in the mainstream, apart from typists. People didn't know how to use keyboards until PCs came into the world and into the home, right, in the 90s. So, I have no doubt that this will change, but there's a bunch of other social implications, and that is there's actually a subset of that social implication, which is actually content creation. So I remember when I was at Microsoft, and I don't know if you remember Windows Mobile. as an alternative to iOS and or Android. And one of the big selling points from Microsoft was that you could program for Windows Mobile in .NET. And they were saying, if you're a .NET programmer, you're a mobile programmer. And so you can program for the Windows Phone, right? And the reason they said that, and I used to be a group manager in evangelism, is because of all the programmers in the world, 40% of them program in .NET. Of all the programmers in enterprise, it's about 70%, 72% back in the day. And so the idea was that, well, hey, if you can program in .NET, you can program for Windows Phone. Windows Phone will then be a platform that people will develop a lot of content for, and then people, users will want to buy Windows phones rather than Apple's iPhones or Android phones. And the truth was that if you were a .NET programmer, you weren't a mobile programmer, because a mobile interface is a very, very different style of programming to programming for the desktop. You've got a much smaller screen, you're loosely connected, you don't have full connection, you don't have a keyboard, you don't have a mouse. So you've got to do things, the whole user experience is different. The whole programming, you've got much less memory, so you've got to scavenge memory a lot more frequently. You've got to keep track of variables in a way. Like, there's just a whole bunch of different things technologically wise, programming for a phone than programming for PCs or for desktops or for servers. And so we all know what happened with Windows Phone, right? And the same is true for programming for spatial computing. Programming for AR and for VR is very, very different than for programming for the desktop and for the web. Using size, space, affinity, relation, motion, color, sound, understanding things like reflection, colliders, materials, textures, and putting them into a user interface that, or a user experience that, a user interface that drives a user experience that people who aren't used to this content can use is massive, right? And when we think about embedding the metaverse, right? So every single thing that you can do in the real world, you should be able to do in the virtual world. So it doesn't matter whether you're using a till in a store, or whether you're using a fire extinguisher, or whether you're operating a bread bagging machine, or whether you're buying a ticket, whatever it is, that content has to be programmed. And we just don't have enough programmers to program that content. So we are a long, long way from having content to drive this technology as well. So, but let's talk about the broader social implications. And, when you think about the social implications, so this is the kind of the dystopian thing, right? If you think Ready Player One, everybody lives in these tenement houses, and then they just jack in, and their real life is in the metaverse. And as somebody who's been using virtual reality for the last 7 years, who I've had the epiphany in virtual reality, I run a business that depends on virtual reality. I probably use VR maybe a couple of hours a month, and a lot of that is testing our own products. I'd much rather go for a walk or a run or ride my motorbike, or get into a forest, or get on a boat, or go snowboarding, or go water skiing, or just sit in a train and go to the Botanic Gardens, or have a dinner with my family. Like, I will never replace those things in VR. I see the utility of VR. Absolutely. I see the utility of being able to sit in a room with my daughter who's in France and my other daughter who's in the UK, and tell a story to my grandson in VR. I'd much rather do that in VR than in Zoom, but that's that's a pretty niche use case. And even things like working, I've been in Horizons workrooms, and I've been in spatial IO, and I think the social implications are huge. So is this a fad, or is this fire? Is this something as world-changing as the wheel and fire and language and the printing press and the internet. I don't think so. I think AR and VR as technologies is where the roadmap leads to from a presentation perspective. Just because we've got smartphones and tablets doesn't mean we don't have desktops and laptops. Just because we've got PCs and with amazing amounts of computing power doesn't mean we don't have parallel processing in the cloud. What we used to call a mainframe, we've now just got cloud computing, right? And we've had server computing and backroom computing. So I can see a world where we have AR and VR as one of the options of ways to connect with content that can be very, very helpful to help us transact and learn and work and you know, play, leisure, and everything else. But I don't think it's going to replace any of the tools that we have now. I don't think it has to replace any of the tools that we have now. I think it can coexist quite nicely, which then begs the question of whether we need this central federated transitive trust. And again, I don't think so. I think the forces of nation sovereignty and all of the things that we have in place already, copyright and patents and contract law, which are all enforceable and enforced, you know, those will undergo digital transformation, no question. But does that mean that they have to go into Web 3.0 or the metaverse or blockchain? And I don't know. I don't know if the answer to that is that they have to. Look, it's 9:30. I guess this was pretty much my last slide, which was financial implications. So is this the $1 trillion opportunity? And this is just, again, one of those sort of, imagine you're wearing augmented reality glasses and, you know, you walk down this road and you've got everything from danger and hazards and directions and entertainment. You've got things like, you know, a bank, and you've got adverts. Now, imagine the two of us are walking down the road together. We're both wearing AR glasses, and think of a billboard advert in today's world, even a digital billboard advert in today's world. If you drive down the M2 motorway and you look up at a digital billboard, we both see the same billboard. Now, when you and I look at our Facebook pages, we both see different adverts. We see adverts that are targeted to us. Now, imagine a mashup of that. Imagine you walk down the street and there is an infinite canvas that Facebook, Meta, or any company can target you. So now not only can they target you by your behavior on the web, but they can actually target you by your behavior in real life, who you speak to, how long you take to do things, where you travel, where you actually are, how often you're in that place. And they can, you know, pretty much in your real space, you have this infinite canvas of targeted advertising. Personally, you can see where the $1 trillion opportunity comes from, right? This is why Facebook wants to go there. This is why Facebook, because Facebook basically go, well, we've already got 3 billion, 2.5 billion active users on Facebook every day, and we capture their attention, but we only capture a certain amount of their attention. The only attention we capture is when they're actually looking at their 2D display, and they can't look at their 2D display when they're walking or driving or catching, or playing tennis or whatever. But what if playing tennis was in virtual reality? And what if walking and driving was in augmented reality? Now we can target them 24/7. And that's why, that sounds like it might be very cynical, but I believe that's why they want to go into the metaverse, why they want to bring the metaverse into our lives, because it's this infinite canvas for targeted advertising where we are the product and we provide them the content and not only the attention content, but also the sales content, because everybody who's on Facebook is also trying to sell something. And so, they're paying Facebook to get people's attention. And if you can give people an infinite canvas, you know, that's pretty much, you know, where you kind of would grow Facebook to, right?
Wow, that's a hugely profound view. Like, wow, I'm still having trouble digesting that, but it's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. It's also very scary, but you know, this is why I think the battleground and the battlefield player is Apple. Apple have refused to give an inch on VR at all. They've definitely got, you know, like my company would definitely be running Macs if we could program for VR on Macs, but we can't. We can't run VR headsets on Macs. So so we're stuck in the Windows world at this stage. And that's because they believe that the future of computing is in AR, as in glasses, and that's what they're working towards. And they're overcoming those laws of physics challenges that I spoke about. But we've already seen their stance on privacy. We've already seen their stance on companies like Facebook and Google using their platforms to get at users and actually locking down apps from using your data on other apps and targeting you from your behavior. So I believe that when Apple do come out with their glasses, their display glasses, whether they're VR or AR, they're probably going to be AR, they're going to have a very, very different narrative about using this technology to connect to information and to people. And hopefully it's not this. It's not this, you know, this infinite canvas for networking, for advertising. All right, it is 25 to 10. So thanks guys very much for joining, and for everybody who's watching online. Thank you very much as well for watching. And yeah, I'd love to catch up with you guys for a coffee if you're both in Sydney. Really, you know, love to find out what you guys are doing and how I can get involved and help.
Sure. Thank you very much, Roger. That was very generous of that presentation and your time on a Sunday evening.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, likewise here, Roger. That was awesome. Thank you very much.
Okay. Cheers, guys.